The auction yard reeked of sweat, cheap whiskey, and something darker. A circle of rough men surrounded a makeshift wooden platform, their voices sharp with laughter and cruel bargains. On that platform stood a girl, barefoot, her wrists tied with frayed rope. Her torn dress hung off one shoulder, revealing a tattoo half hidden beneath the fabric. A black bird spiraling upward, wings spread as if ready to break free. At the edge of the crowd, Ethan Cole froze. He knew that mark. 5 years ago, when he'd been left to die in the desert, a warrior bearing the same symbol had pulled him back from the edge of death. This girl, this stranger, was connected to that man. A voice called out bids, mocking her worth. Ethan's jaw clenched. Before he could think, the words left his mouth like a gunshot. "I'll buy her." The laughter died. All eyes turned. The crowd didn't know it yet, but this choice would drag Ethan back into a fight he thought he'd left buried with the ghosts of his past. The sun was sinking behind the desert hills, spilling its last light across the wide plains like molten gold. The wind carried the smell of dust and dry sage, whispering against the fence posts of a ranch that stood lonely against the horizon. Ethan Cole leaned against the wooden rail, his hand resting on the neck of his old horse, Dusty. The animal's coat had grown gray with age, much like the man who owned it. Ethan had lived here for years, far from the noise of towns and the petty cruelties of men. His days were simple. Mend a fence, water the cattle, ride the pastures, and listen to the quiet creak of the windmill turning. But the silence was never complete. In his mind he still heard echoes, gunfire from another life, the desperate cries of Apache women and children, and the roar of flames devouring their camp. He had been there that night, 5 years ago, wearing the blue uniform of a cavalry scout. What he saw, and failed to stop, had driven him off the trail of men and into solitude. He rarely went into town, only when he had to. But that evening, as the shadows stretched long and the sky turned bruised purple, he saddled Dusty and set out. The pantry was low on flour and salt, and the horse needed new shoes. He told himself that was the only reason he was riding toward San Pedro, the dusty border town 10 miles east. By the time Ethan reached town, night had almost fallen. The single main street glimmered with weak lamplight, and the usual chatter spilled from the saloon doors. He tied Dusty to the hitching post, gave the horse a gentle pat, and started toward the general store. That's when he heard it, a sharp crack of a gavel and a murmur of voices behind the warehouse. Ethan paused. He didn't care for gatherings, especially not the kind that hid in shadows. Curiosity, however, had a way of pulling at him when he least wanted it. He stepped around the corner, boots crunching on gravel, and the sound grew clearer. Laughter mixed with rough bidding, the tone hard and cold. Then he saw the crowd, packed tight around a wooden platform lit by lanterns. On that platform stood a girl. Her wrists were bound by coarse rope, her dress torn at the shoulder. The lamplight revealed a face both defiant and worn, skin bronzed by sun, hair black as midnight and loose as the wind. Her dark eyes scanned the mob, daring them to meet her gaze. For a moment, Ethan considered walking away. He had no business here. Trouble wasn't what he came looking for. But as he turned, something caught his eye. A mark on her bare shoulder, a hawk etched in black ink, wings arched as if mid-flight. Ethan froze. He knew that mark. It belonged to Tala, the Apache warrior who once dragged him out of the desert, half dead, and gave him water when no one else would. And just like that, the quiet life Ethan Cole had built for himself began to crack. The crowd jeered as the auctioneer, a thin man with a crooked hat, slammed his gavel against the post. $5 to start, he barked, his voice like sand scraping against wood. Laughter rose from the circle of men, farmhands, drifters, and rough traders with whiskey on their breath. "5? She ain't worth half that," one man shouted. "Look at her, wild as a stray mare," another sneered. The girl, though, stood as still as carved stone. Her breath came sharp, but her chin remained high, her dark eyes unwavering. Ethan felt her gaze sweep across the crowd, challenging them all. He told himself to walk away. This wasn't his fight. He had no use for trouble, no reason to spend his hard-earned coins on a stranger. But that mark, the hawk tattoo, burned in his mind like a brand. Tala had worn the same mark on his hand when he lifted Ethan from the dust 5 years ago. Tala had asked for nothing in return. Ethan stepped closer, boots echoing on the wooden planks. "5," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. The laughter faltered. Heads turned. "Who's this fool?" someone muttered. Another spat on the ground. "Cowboy's gone soft." The auctioneer blinked, surprised by the sudden bid. "5 it is. Any more?" Silence answered him. "Sold!" Ethan tossed the coins into the man's hand. They felt heavier than lead, but his decision was firm. The ropes came off, and the girl stumbled forward, wrists raw and red. She didn't thank him. She didn't say a word. But when their eyes met, something sparked. Recognition, perhaps, or the faintest flicker of trust. "Come on," Ethan murmured, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. The crowd parted, whispers trailing behind them like a bitter wind. "Fool doesn't know what he bought." "She'll bring him nothing but trouble." Ethan ignored them. Trouble had been his shadow for years. They left the square and turned down a narrow alley, the town's lamplight casting long, crooked shadows on the dirt. She followed close but kept her distance, moving with the quiet grace of a hunted animal. When they reached the edge of town where Dusty waited, Ethan stopped. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, lips dry, then spoke, voice steady but low. "Ayanna." He nodded. "I'm Ethan." The silence stretched between them, filled only by the creak of the saddle and the restless shuffle of Dusty's hooves. "You didn't have to," Ayanna said finally, her voice rough from thirst. "I know," Ethan replied, tightening the cinch. He paused, meeting her gaze. "But I owe someone." He swung into the saddle and offered her his hand. After a moment's hesitation, she took it and climbed behind him. As Dusty carried them into the dark stretch of desert road, Ethan knew one thing with absolute certainty. Buying her freedom was only the beginning. If you found this helpful, a quick like really helps us keep creating. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, save for the sound of Dusty's hooves thudding against the hard earth. Ayanna sat behind Ethan, her grip firm but not fearful. She didn't speak, and neither did he. The desert night stretched wide around them, stars spilling across the sky like silver dust. Ethan glanced back once and saw her eyes fixed on the horizon, sharp and unblinking, as if memorizing every shadow. When they reached the ranch, the lantern on the porch swung gently in the breeze. Ethan dismounted first, tying Dusty to the rail. He offered his hand, but Ayanna slid down on her own, landing lightly on her bare feet. Her wrists were still raw from the ropes, the skin bruised and angry. "Come inside," Ethan said gruffly. She hesitated, looking around as though she expected trouble even here. Then she followed him into the small wooden house. It was a plain space, just a table, a chair, a narrow bed, and a shelf with a few tools and a worn Bible coated in dust. Ethan grabbed a tin basin, poured water, and set it down. "You should clean those," he said, gesturing to her wrists. She sat, dipping her hands into the water. Her movements were deliberate, almost ceremonial, as if she were washing away not just the dirt, but the shame of the auction. She glanced up at him. "Why did you do it?" Ethan shrugged. "Let's just say I've owed someone a long time." She studied him for a moment, but said nothing more. Ethan pulled a strip of clean cloth from a drawer, handed it to her, and stepped outside to check the corral. The night was unusually still, too still. He scanned the horizon. In the far distance, he caught sight of something, a dark silhouette moving against the pale moonlight. A horseman, then another. 3 riders in total, watching from a ridge half a mile away. They weren't townsfolk. The way they sat their saddles, the stillness of their silhouettes, they were hunters. Ethan's hand instinctively brushed the worn handle of his revolver. He didn't like the feel of this. He turned back into the house. "You have people after you," he said, his tone low. Ayanna looked up from where she was wrapping her wrists. Her expression didn't change. "Yes," she said, simply. "Those men at the auction, they weren't just selling you off, were they?" She shook her head. "No, they are not traitors. They are vultures. They come for what they can take, and they never stop until they have bled a place dry." Ethan frowned. Red vultures? He'd heard the name before, whispered in saloons. A gang of cutthroats, half bandits, half ex-soldiers who had turned rogue. Ayanna's gaze hardened. "They took my sisters." The words hung in the air like a bell tolling. Ethan didn't know what to say. He poured himself a cup of water and drank slowly, his mind turning. "They'll come here," Ayanna said, her voice steady. "Yeah," Ethan muttered. "I reckon they will." He set the cup down and glanced toward the door. But they won't like what they find. Outside, the distant horsemen disappeared over the ridge. But Ethan knew they'd be back, and next time they wouldn't just be watching. The night deepened, pressing against the windows like a heavy hand. Ethan sat at the table, sharpening his old knife with slow, steady strokes. Across from him, Ayanna wrapped herself in a rough wool blanket, her dark eyes reflecting the flicker of the lantern. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "You said they took your sisters. Tell me what happened." Ayanna's jaw tightened, as if the words were heavy stones she had to lift one by one. "It was 3 nights ago. They came to our village. Sani and Kaya were still awake, weaving by the fire. We thought we were safe, but then we heard the horses." She stopped, her breath catching. Ethan waited. "They came like a storm, men with guns, faces painted with greed. They said we had to pay for living on land that wasn't ours. My father refused. He told them we were free people, that no man could own us." Her eyes glistened, but her voice remained steady. "So they killed him." Ethan's hand froze on the knife handle. He could see the image too clearly, the burning camp, the sound of gunfire, the smell of blood. It mirrored the night 5 years ago, when he'd stood by and done nothing. "They tied Sani and Kaya, and they tried to take me too," Ayanna continued. "I fought. I ran into the dark. I thought I had escaped, but they found me again. They said they'd make money off me, same as my sisters. That's why I was there, in that place." She trailed off, her voice raw. Ethan leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "Red vultures," he muttered, almost to himself. Ayanna nodded. "That's what they call themselves. A pack of scavengers. Their leader, he's not just a bandit. He's a soldier." Her tone sharpened. "A scar on his face, down the left side. I'll never forget it." Ethan's stomach twisted. He knew that scar. He had seen it years ago, on the man who led the massacre Tala's village suffered, the man who ordered fire and bullets when Ethan's voice couldn't stop them. Ayanna caught his expression. "You know him?" Ethan looked at her, the weight of years pressing on his shoulders. "Yeah, I know him." Ayanna leaned forward. "Then you understand. If we don't stop them, my sisters—" Her voice cracked just slightly before she forced it steady again. "They'll be gone, sold, or worse." For a moment the room was silent except for the hum of the night. Ethan felt the old war inside him stir, the part of him that hated violence but hated cowardice more. "You're asking me to go after a gang of killers?" Ethan said. "I'm not asking," Ayanna replied, her voice as sharp as the blade in his hand. "I'll go with or without you, but you know this land, you can track, and—" she paused, searching his eyes, "you owe my father." Ethan exhaled, slow and heavy. She wasn't wrong. He stood, walking to the door. Outside, the night stretched wide and unforgiving. Somewhere out there, 3 riders waited, and beyond them, a gang that had blood on its hands, some of it his from long ago. He turned back to Ayanna. "We'll need to ride at dawn," he said. The morning came pale and cold, the desert sky washed with muted shades of pink and gray. Ethan stood in the yard, tightening the saddle straps on Dusty. He hadn't slept much. Each time he closed his eyes, old ghosts stirred. The Apache camp ablaze, the echo of gunshots, the face of the man with the scar. Ayanna stepped out of the cabin, her hair tied back, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon. She had found one of Ethan's old shirts and tied it at the waist. The fabric hung loose, but her presence was strong, unshaken. "You're up early," Ethan said, glancing at her. "Red vultures don't wait," she replied simply. He handed her a water canteen. "You're sure about the scar down his left cheek?" "Yes," Ayanna said, her voice carrying a weight of fire. "He led them that night. I remember his laugh when my father stood against him. It was a cruel laugh, the kind of sound you don't forget." Ethan's hand tightened around the leather strap. He looked away, jaw set. "You know him?" she pressed. "I do." His voice was low, almost gravelly. "He used to wear a uniform, same as I did." Ayanna's gaze hardened. "A soldier." Ethan nodded, the truth heavy on his tongue. "Back then, I was just a scout, hired to ride with them. Thought I was helping keep the peace. What I saw that night—" he shook his head, the memory raw. "I couldn't stop it. I tried, but—" "But you didn't," she said, her words like a blade. He flinched, but didn't deny it. "I walked away after that, left the uniform, left everything. But some things don't leave you." Ayanna studied him for a long moment, the anger and pain in her eyes mixing with something else, curiosity, maybe even reluctant understanding. "Then this is your fight too," she said, "not just mine." Ethan met her gaze. In that instant he knew she was right. This wasn't just about repaying Tala. It wasn't about some noble cause. This was about facing the man he once was, the man who stood by while others burned. "We'll need to find their trail," Ethan said finally, breaking the silence. Ayanna nodded. "I can track them. I know how they move. But we'll have to be quick." "My sisters, they don't have much time." Ethan adjusted his hat, eyes narrowing. "Then we ride today." Before they could leave, a sound split the morning air, a distant gunshot, followed by the faint cry of a bird startled from the trees. Both of them froze. "They're close," Ayanna whispered. Ethan's hand went to his revolver. He stepped onto the porch, scanning the distant hills. Sure enough, a group of riders was moving fast along the ridge, red vultures' scouts. "They know you got away," Ethan said grimly. "They'll come for us," Ayanna added, her tone like steel. "Let 'em," Ethan muttered, gripping the rifle leaning by the door. For the first time in years, his hands felt steady, his heart ready. The red vultures came at dusk. Ethan had been expecting them since morning, every muscle tight as coiled rope. He and Ayanna spent the day preparing the ranch, checking ammunition, and gathering what they could not afford to leave behind. Dusty snorted nervously in the corral as the sky darkened, painting the horizon a bruised orange. "They'll come before the stars," Ethan said, glancing toward the hills. Ayanna, crouched by the barn door, tightened the straps on her leather knife sheath. "We should be ready before they are." He gave her a grim smile. "We are." Then it began, the distant thunder of hooves pounding against the dry earth. A column of black dust rose in the distance, carried by the desert wind. Ethan stepped onto the porch with his rifle slung across his shoulder, watching the riders emerge like shadows out of the setting sun. There were 5 of them, scouts most likely, but their swagger spoke of ownership, like they had already decided this land belonged to them. The lead rider, a stocky man with a ragged red bandana tied around his neck, slowed his horse and called out, "Evening, cowboy. We're looking for something that belongs to us." His grin was all teeth, rotten and yellow. Ethan's fingers brushed the lever of his rifle. "Don't see anything here with your name on it." The man chuckled. "The girl, Apache breed. She ran off. We're just here to take her back." Behind Ethan, Ayanna stepped into the doorway. Her gaze was sharp, her knife gleaming in the fading light. "You'll never take me," she said in a voice so calm it cut through the noise. The men laughed. "Feisty little thing, ain't she?" another called. "Don't worry, cowboy. We'll make it worth your while to hand her over, or we'll just take what we want and burn what's left." That last threat settled it. Ethan raised his rifle. "You get one warning," he said evenly. "Ride back where you came from." The leader's grin vanished. "Boys," he growled. The sound of guns being cocked broke the last thread of silence. Ethan fired first. The shot cracked through the air, dropping one rider from his saddle. The others scattered, bullets sparking against the wood of the porch. Ayanna ducked behind the doorway, tossing Ethan a second rifle. "Cover me," she shouted. Before Ethan could stop her, she sprinted toward the barn, moving like a shadow, swift and sure. One of the bandits wheeled his horse to follow her, but Ethan's shot caught him clean in the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle. The remaining 3 regrouped near the corral, firing wildly. One bullet shattered a lantern, flames licking at the side of the barn. "Damn it," Ethan muttered. He leapt from the porch and ran to the water trough, kicking it over to douse the flames, while Ayanna flanked the riders from the shadows of the barn. She lunged, knife flashing, slashing a rider's leg and sending him tumbling. The last 2 rode off, one of them shouting, "We'll be back, and next time we'll bring the whole pack." Ethan and Ayanna stood in the yard, breathing hard, the barn smoldering behind them. "They won't stop," she said quietly. "No," Ethan agreed, reloading his rifle with steady hands. "Which means we can't wait here." He looked toward the horizon where the red vultures had vanished. His voice hardened. "It's time to take the fight to them." Night fell heavy over the ranch, the desert stars sharp and cold above. The smell of burned wood still lingered in the air, drifting from the blackened corner of the barn. Ethan sat by a small campfire just beyond the porch, the light of the flames flickering across his weathered face. His rifle lay beside him, cleaned and loaded, while Ayanna crouched opposite, sharpening her knife in slow, precise strokes. "They'll return before long," Ayanna said, not looking up. Her voice carried no fear, only certainty. Ethan poked at the fire with a stick. "Yeah, and next time they won't come with 5, they'll come with 15. Ayanna glanced up, her eyes dark and steady. "Then we cannot wait for them here." Ethan sighed, his jaw tightening. He'd been thinking the same thing. But going after the red vultures meant riding straight into hell, a hell he'd spent years avoiding. "They'll have your sisters," he said. Ayanna nodded once. "Sani and Kaya, my blood." She paused, and her voice softened, almost breaking. "They are all I have left." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled. A lone coyote howled in the distance, and the desert wind whispered through the mesquite trees. Ethan reached for his canteen, took a drink, and stared into the flames. "I swore I was done with all this," he said finally. "Guns, blood, riding into fights that don't belong to me." He shook his head. "But this one, maybe it does belong to me. Maybe it always did." Ayanna tilted her head slightly, watching him. "Why?" Ethan looked at her, and for the first time since they'd met, he spoke of Tala. 5 years ago, I was out there, half dead in the sand. Tala, your father, he found me, gave me water, kept me alive. Didn't ask who I was or what I'd done. He just saved me." His voice dropped to a rough whisper. "I never paid that debt." "Not until now." Ayanna's expression softened, though her posture remained proud. "Then we go together." Ethan nodded slowly, like a man accepting a sentence. "At first light, we ride. We find them before they move your sisters. We finish this." She extended her hand across the fire. Ethan hesitated, then clasped it. Her grip was strong, calloused from years of survival, but there was warmth there, too. "Before we go," Ethan added quietly, "I need to say something." Ayanna waited as he took off his hat and bowed his head. His words came haltingly at first, like someone speaking to an old friend after too long. "Lord, it's been a while. I don't know if you've got reason to listen to a man like me, but I'm asking you now. Keep her sister safe. Give me the strength to see this through." When he looked up, Ayanna's gaze lingered on him for a moment, unreadable, before she sheathed her knife. "Then we ride at dawn," she said. The night stretched long and quiet after that. Neither of them slept much, but neither of them needed to. A storm was coming, and both knew it would break before the sun was high. The first light of dawn painted the desert in muted gold and gray. Ethan tightened the last strap on Dusty's saddle, while Ayanna adjusted a small bundle of supplies on her own horse, a slender chestnut mare she had found wandering near the ranch after the attack. The animals snorted, their breath misting in the cool morning air. "Ready?" Ethan asked. Ayanna gave a single nod, her dark eyes fixed on the horizon. "The gorge is west. If we ride hard, we can reach it before nightfall." They set off just as the sun breached the edge of the world. The desert stretched before them, wide and merciless, the land a quilt of cracked earth and scattered mesquite trees. Dust rose in their wake, curling around their boots and spurs. For a time, the only sound was the steady rhythm of hooves pounding the ground. Ayanna rode with a natural grace, her posture straight and sure. Every so often, she would glance to the side, scanning the ground, the rocks, the faintest signs of movement. Once she raised her hand and pulled her mare to a halt. "Tracks," she murmured, dismounting. She crouched low, fingers brushing against the shallow impressions in the dirt. 6 horses, heavy. They passed here yesterday. Ethan leaned down in his saddle. "Red vultures?" "Yes," she said. "They are not careful. They think no one will follow." Her tone carried both anger and resolve. She stood and mounted again, urging her mare forward. By midday, the sun bore down like a hammer, the heat pressing against their backs. Ethan offered Ayanna his canteen, but she shook her head. "You drink," she said. "I know how to wait." He studied her for a moment, then took a small sip. She was tough, tougher than many men he had known, but behind her steel he could sense the weight of fear for her sisters. They stopped briefly in the shade of a lone rock outcrop, eating jerky in silence. Ayanna traced something in the sand, a rough outline of the gorge. "They keep what they take in Rattlesnake Gorge," she said quietly. "It is narrow, with high cliffs. They will have guards posted." Ethan nodded. "Then we go in quiet, take your sisters, and get out before they know what hit them." Ayanna's lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile. "You sound like a warrior now." He chuckled dryly. "I'm just an old cowboy who's seen too many fights, but I aim to win this one." As the afternoon wore on, the landscape changed. The ground rose into rough hills dotted with cacti and jagged stones. Ayanna pointed out faint signs along the trail, a broken twig, ashes of an old campfire, and once a strip of torn fabric snagged on a thorn bush. "They're close," she murmured. The air grew cooler as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in streaks of crimson and violet. At last they crested a ridge, and Ethan saw it. Rattlesnake Gorge. A dark, jagged scar in the earth, the canyon twisted like a coiled serpent. From somewhere deep below, a thin wisp of smoke rose, carrying the smell of campfire and unwashed men. Ayanna's eyes narrowed. "They're here." Ethan adjusted his hat and checked his rifle, the weight of it solid in his hands. "Then we plan tonight," he said, "and tomorrow we take them back." The wind shifted, carrying a low whistle through the canyon walls. A warning, or maybe just the desert's breath. Either way, Ethan felt it in his bones. The real fight was about to begin. If you like this video, please comment number 1. If you don't like it, please comment number 2. The desert night was a living thing, breathing heat and dust into the air, swallowing sound beneath the low hum of crickets. Ethan and Ayanna crouched on a ridge of jagged rock, their silhouettes merging with the darkness. Below them, Rattlesnake Gorge yawned like a scar in the earth, its walls steep and shadowed, the floor glowing faintly from the outlaw campfires. Ethan lifted his spyglass, the brass cool against his cheek. "Count 'em," he muttered. Ayanna's eyes followed the movements below. 12 men, she whispered. 3 wagons, tied horses on the east side. There, she pointed with a sharp nod. "My sisters." Ethan focused the lens. 2 young women sat bound near the central fire, their heads bowed, faces pale in the shifting light. Even from here, he could see how tightly they clung to each other, their backs pressed against a wagon wheel. His jaw tightened. The red vultures moved like wolves, rough and loud. Some drank from tin cups, others sharpened knives or rolled dice on an overturned crate. Their laughter carried up the canyon, cruel and careless. Ethan lowered the glass. "They've gotten comfortable." "That's their mistake," Ayanna said, her voice cold as steel. She was already studying the rocks, mapping every shadow and path. "We can go down from the west side, crawl through the boulders. They won't see us until it's too late." Ethan studied the terrain. The west approach was narrow, with jagged stones and loose gravel. A good path for stealth, but one wrong step could send a rock clattering, and then they'd have the whole camp on them. "We'll have one shot at this," he said. "Get in, cut the ropes, get out.
If they wake before we're clear, he didn't finish. He didn't need to. Ayana's gaze burned with determination. Then we fight. Ethan looked at her. She was young, but there was something unbreakable in her stance, like the desert itself, scarred but enduring. He gave a short nod. All right, we wait until the fire burns low, midnight. She didn't answer, just settled back against the stone, her eyes never leaving her sister's. Ethan checked his rifle, counting the rounds, and slid his knife into its sheath. This was it, the point of no return. The campfire had burned low, its flames nothing more than a bed of glowing embers. The red vultures sprawled in uneven circles, their snores mixing with the creak of leather and the occasional restless whinny of a horse.
The night was still, but Ethan's heartbeat was not. It drummed against his ribs as he crawled behind Ayana, each movement deliberate, silent, measured. They slipped down the west side of the canyon, using boulders and shadows for cover. The moon, sharp and pale, traced silver edges along the jagged rocks. Ethan carried his knife in one hand and his revolver tucked against his thigh, ready to fire if things went bad. Ayana moved like she was part of the earth itself. Her bare feet found each patch of sand without a sound, her body low and coiled with tension. When they reached the first wagon, she froze, glancing at Ethan. He nodded once, signaling for her to move. They crept toward the sisters. Sania and Kaya sat with their hands bound, heads drooped as if asleep. Ayana's breath caught when she saw them, relief and fury mingling in her eyes. She knelt, whispering something soft in her native tongue, and began cutting through the ropes with a swift stroke of her blade. Ethan's eyes swept the camp. He counted the men again, his gaze landing on a nearby sentry. The man had fallen asleep against a boulder, rifle across his knees. Good. They were almost out. Then it happened.
One of the sisters shifted suddenly, bumping into a half-empty bottle of whiskey left beside the wagon wheel. The bottle rolled across the dirt and clinked against a stone. Ethan froze. A drunk outlaw stirred, his head lifting sluggishly from the ground. His bleary eyes blinked at the shadowy figures crouched by the wagon. "Hey!" His voice was thick and slurred, but loud enough. Before he could shout again, Ethan lunged. His knife flashed once, silencing the man with a swift strike. He eased the body down, heart pounding. But the damage was done. A shout erupted from the far side of camp. Another man stirred, then another. Horses snorted and stamped as the camp erupted in chaos. "Go!" Ethan hissed. He grabbed Solani's arm, hauling her to her feet as Ayana pulled Kaya free. The night exploded with gunfire. Gunfire tore through the night, echoing like thunder against the canyon walls. Ethan shoved Solani toward the rocks and spun, lever-action rifle snapping into place. His first shot dropped a red vulture before the man could clear his holster. "Stay low," Ethan barked, racking the lever and firing again. Ayana grabbed Kaya's hand, pulling her behind a wagon as bullets splintered the wood. Her knife gleamed in the moonlight. One bandit lunged at her from the shadows, but she met him head-on, her blade slashing across his forearm. He screamed, stumbling back, giving Ethan a clear shot. "Two down," Ethan muttered under his breath. But there were still too many. The camp erupted into chaos. Horses reared, jerking against their tethers, their hooves pounding the earth. Lanterns were knocked over, flames licking across the dry ground. Smoke curled into the night, turning the air thick and acrid. "Get to the west trail," Ethan yelled. Ayana nodded and pushed her sisters toward the narrow goat path. She turned back just in time to see a bandit charging Ethan with a club. Ethan pivoted, slamming the butt of his rifle into the man's jaw. The bandit collapsed, but another one fired, the bullet sparking against a rock inches from Ethan's head. Ethan ducked behind a wagon, breathing hard. He counted his shots, 3 rounds left. Not enough.
The red vultures regrouped on the far side of the fire, 5 men crouched low, spreading out in a half circle.
Their leader wasn't among them yet, but Ethan could feel the man's presence, watching, waiting. Ayanna crawled beside Ethan, her chest heaving. "We can't outrun them like this," she said, eyes scanning for an opening. "Then we don't outrun them," Ethan replied grimly. "We hold here." He peeked around the wagon, lined up a shot, and pulled the trigger. Another outlaw fell, clutching his shoulder. The rest fired wildly, their bullets cracking through the night. "Ethan!" Ayanna shouted. She pointed toward a loose crate of dynamite sticks near the wagons. "There!" A quick, desperate plan formed in his mind. He grabbed one stick, struck a match, and hurled it toward the fire. The explosion ripped through the canyon, throwing men and debris into the air. For a heartbeat, the camp was silent, stunned. Then the leader stepped into the open. A tall, broad-shouldered man with a scar running down his cheek, grinning like a wolf. The leader emerged from the smoke like a ghost of Ethan's worst memories. He wore a tattered cavalry coat, stripped of its insignia, the left sleeve torn where the scar on his cheek twisted down to his jaw like a cruel brand. His grin was cold, teeth yellow in the flickering firelight. "Well, I'll be damned," the man drawled, his voice low and mocking. "Ethan Cole, I thought you'd buried that rifle in your shame years ago." Ethan stepped out from behind the wagon, rifle leveled, his jaw tight. "Didn't expect to see you leading vultures." "Some men were born to scavenge what others are too weak to keep." The leader's eyes glinted as they swept over Ayanna and her sisters huddled by the rocks. "These little birds, they're worth more than cattle to the right buyer." Ethan's hand flexed on the rifle stock. "You're not taking them anywhere." The man chuckled, a hollow sound. "Like you stopped me last time." His grin widened. "I still remember the look on your face the night of the massacre. You watched, didn't you? Watched while we burned their camp to the ground." Ethan's stomach twisted. "I was there," he said, voice steady but low, "and I've carried that fire in my gut every day since." The leader drew his revolver, spinning it lazily on his finger. "Then let's see if you've got any fight left, scout." Ethan fired first, but the leader dove aside, the shot splintering a post. The duel began, a brutal, chaotic dance in the dim light. The leader fired, grazing Ethan's arm. Pain shot through him, but he pushed forward, diving behind a fallen log, returning fire. Ayanna shouted from the rocks, "Ethan!" but he couldn't answer. His world had narrowed to the scarred man in front of him, the man who had haunted his nightmares. The leader charged, knocking the rifle from Ethan's hands. They grappled, fists pounding, boots scraping against the dirt. Ethan felt his strength falter as the man's hand closed around his throat. But something hardened inside him. He remembered Tala's voice, calm and firm, that day in the desert. "A man's worth is what he stands for when the fire comes." With a roar, Ethan twisted, yanking the man's arm and driving his own knife into the leader's side. The outlaw's grin froze, then faded as he crumpled to the ground. Ethan staggered back, blood trickling down his arm, breath ragged. The camp went still. For a heartbeat, silence clung to the canyon like a heavy shroud. Ethan stood over the fallen leader, chest heaving, blood soaking through the sleeve of his shirt. The red vultures stared at him, faces pale in the firelight, their confidence faltering now that their wolf had fallen. But the moment didn't last. A shout rang out, harsh and furious. One of the outlaws raised his rifle, and the others followed, rage sparking in their eyes. Ethan barely had time to reach for his fallen weapon when the sound of pounding hooves echoed from the ridge above. Ayana's head snapped up, her eyes widening with recognition. "Ethan," she breathed, "they came." The dark line of riders appeared against the moonlight. Apache warriors, painted with ash and streaks of crimson, their feathers whipping in the wind. They descended the ridge like a storm breaking loose, whooping and hollering, their voices fierce and unyielding. The red vultures faltered, their line breaking. One man shouted, "It's the tribes!" but his words were drowned out by the thunder of hooves and the twang of bowstrings. Arrows whistled through the air, striking the ground and wagon wheels, forcing the outlaws into chaos. Ethan grabbed his rifle, firing into the confusion to cover the sisters as they scrambled behind the rocks. Ayana snatched a fallen pistol and took down a man who lunged toward Kaya. The Apache riders swept through the camp, their movements swift and precise, scattering the red vultures like dry leaves in a gale. Two of the outlaws dropped their guns and tried to run, only to be cut off by a wall of galloping horses. Ethan turned to Ayana, who was guiding her sisters toward safety. "Stay with them," he shouted over the chaos. She nodded, eyes blazing, but didn't back down. Instead, she knelt beside her sisters, pulling them close while keeping her pistol trained on the nearest outlaw. The skirmish didn't last long. Without their leader, the red vultures had no spine. Those who didn't fall surrendered, hands raised as the Apache warriors circled them. When the last gun fell silent, the night felt almost unreal. Smoke curled from the burning crates, and the sound of moaning wounded men replaced the fury of battle. Ayana turned to Ethan, who was leaning heavily on his rifle. "It's over," she said softly. Ethan shook his head. "Almost." The canyon was eerily quiet after the storm of violence. The last of the smoke from the burning wagons curled upward, carrying the acrid scent of gunpowder and scorched wood. Ayana's sisters clung to her, their faces streaked with dirt and tears, but alive, breathing, trembling, alive. Ethan stood a few steps away, leaning against a boulder, his rifle dangling loosely in one hand. His arm throbbed with pain where the bullet had grazed him, and every muscle felt heavy as lead. Still, he forced himself to stay upright, scanning the camp for any lingering threat. Ayana approached him, her gaze steady despite the exhaustion written across her face. "You're hurt," she said quietly. "I've been worse," he replied with a faint smirk, though his knees threatened to give out. Behind her, the Apache warriors moved with calm efficiency, binding the surviving red vultures and tending to their own wounded. One of the riders, a tall gray-haired warrior with a scar across his brow, approached Ethan and offered a nod. It wasn't a smile, but it was close enough to respect. Ayana turned to her sisters, brushing dirt from Kaya's hair and squeezing Sani's hands. "It's over now," she whispered in her native tongue. The younger girls clung to her, their tears soaking into her shirt. For the first time in days, Ayana's fierce composure cracked, and she pulled them into a long, trembling embrace. Ethan stepped back, giving them space. He let out a long breath he didn't know he'd been holding. The fight had left him drained, but there was something lighter in his chest, a weight he hadn't felt in years lifting at last. "You kept your word," Ayana said, turning to him with quiet gratitude. Ethan tipped his hat, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I reckon I did." One of the Apache warriors called out to Ayana, speaking in quick, sharp tones. She nodded and turned back to Ethan. "They will take us home. You don't have to come further." Ethan looked past her, to where the first light of dawn was brushing the canyon walls with pale gold. He thought of the ranch waiting for him, quiet and lonely. He thought of Tala, of debts and promises. "Just make sure they stay safe," he said finally, his voice rough. Ayana's dark eyes softened. "You'll always be welcome among us, Ethan Cole." He watched them ride out, the three sisters together at last. As their figures disappeared into the morning light, Ethan leaned on his rifle and let the silence settle. For the first time in years, it felt like peace. Before we dive into everything, let us know in the comments, where are you watching this video from? Connecting with viewers from all across the world has been a huge source of inspiration for us. The first rays of dawn stretched across the desert like a quiet blessing. The world was painted in hues of amber and rose, the harsh lines of the canyon softened by the early light. Ethan rode in front, his rifle strapped to his back, while Ayana followed close behind with her sisters, Sani and Kaya, nestled between them on a sturdy mare. The long night of blood and fire seemed to melt into silence as they made their way toward the lands Ayana once called home. Dusty's hooves beat a steady rhythm against the packed earth, almost like the beating of a tired but determined heart. Ethan's arm throbbed where the bullet had grazed him, but he ignored the pain. His mind was on the horizon, where the valley of the Apache lay. When they crested the final ridge, the village came into view. Smoke from early morning fires rose in thin, peaceful columns, curling lazily into the sky. The sound of children's laughter drifted faintly across the open plain, mingling with the rustling of wind in the grass. Ayana inhaled sharply, her eyes softening. "Home," she whispered. As they descended into the valley, figures began to appear. First a few women carrying baskets, then older men standing guard with spears, and finally the children, who ran forward in wide-eyed silence at the sight of the returning sisters. "Ayana!" one of the women cried. The girls were pulled from the saddle into waiting arms, tears flowing freely as the tribe embraced them. Sani and Kaya clung to their older sister as if they would never let go. Ethan stayed back, dismounting quietly. He felt like an outsider at the edge of something sacred, a moment not meant for him. His hand absently stroked Dusty's mane as he watched Ayana laugh through her tears, her face glowing with both relief and exhaustion. Then the elder appeared, a tall, lean man with hair the color of snow and feathers bound in a braid. His sharp gaze moved from Ayana and her sisters to Ethan. For a long moment, neither spoke. The elder's eyes were unreadable, measuring Ethan in silence. Finally, the elder stepped closer, his voice deep and deliberate. "The debt is paid," he said in careful English. Ethan lowered his hat respectfully, feeling the weight of the words settle on him like a mantle lifted. "No, sir," he murmured, voice rough. "It's me who owed it." The elder studied him a moment longer, then gave a single solemn nod. Around them, the tribe gathered, offering water and blankets, tending to the rescued girls. Ayana turned to Ethan, her dark eyes meeting his. "You did more than you know," she said softly. Ethan gave her a faint, almost shy smile. "Your father once saved my life. I just found a way to return the favor." She tilted her head, something unspoken in her gaze, gratitude, but also understanding. "Will you stay?" she asked quietly. "Just for a while?" Ethan glanced at the mountains beyond the village, the open land calling to him like an old friend. He shifted his weight, adjusting his hat. "We'll see," he said, though deep down he already knew the answer. The day passed in a quiet haze of warmth and gratitude. Ethan sat near the edge of the village, watching the Apache tribe celebrate the return of Ayana and her sisters. The women moved gracefully around the fire, preparing food while the children giggled, weaving through the adults like streams of laughter. The men, stoic but relieved, stood watch with a renewed sense of pride. Ethan didn't join them. He leaned against a weathered post, hat low over his eyes, content to be a silent witness. This wasn't his world. It never had been. But for the first time in years, he felt something close to peace. Ayana approached as the sun began to dip, her hair shining in the last amber light. Her sisters trailed behind her, their faces tired but happy. She stopped a few steps from him, holding something in her hand. "This is for you," she said, her voice soft but certain. She placed a small silver bracelet into his palm. It was hand-forged, etched with the pattern of a soaring hawk. Ethan stared at it, running his thumb over the grooves. "It belonged to my father," Ayana explained. "He gave it to me the day I learned to ride. He said it was for the one who'd stand when the fire came." Ethan swallowed, his throat tight. "Ayana, I don't deserve this." "You do," she said simply. "You stood when no one else would. You didn't just save us, you found your own courage again." Her words hit harder than any bullet. Ethan looked up at her, his weathered face softening. "Maybe," he said quietly. "Or maybe I was just too tired of running from myself." Sani and Kaya hugged his arm in silent thanks, their small hands warm against his calloused skin. He smiled faintly, ruffling Kaya's hair. As night settled, the fire in the center of the village burned bright, but Ethan knew it wasn't his place to stay. Before dawn, he saddled Dusty, moving quietly so as not to wake the camp. Ayana, however, was waiting by the corral. "You're leaving," she said, not as a question, but as a knowing statement. Ethan paused, looking at her in the pale starlight. "This is your home, your fight. I've done what I came to do." She stepped closer, her eyes reflecting both the firelight and something deeper. Gratitude, maybe even sorrow. "You could stay," she whispered. Ethan shook his head gently. "A man like me, I'm not meant for staying." He hesitated, then added, "But I reckon I'll carry this place with me." "And your father? He'd be proud of you." Ayana reached out, touching his arm briefly, her fingers warm against his skin. "And I of you," she said. With that, Ethan mounted Dusty. He tipped his hat one last time, the silver bracelet catching the glow of dawn as he turned toward the open plains. As he rode away, the desert stretched endlessly before him. The horizon burned gold with the rising sun, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt the weight of his past lift. Some debts, he thought, are worth every drop of blood they cost. And with that, he disappeared into the horizon, a lone rider, but no longer a lonely soul. If you enjoyed Ethan and Ayana's journey, don't ride off just yet. There's more where this came from. True Wild West Stories is a storytelling series that brings to life the untamed frontier. Tales of lone riders, lost souls, unbreakable bonds, and the silent courage that shaped the West. Each story is inspired by the grit of real history, the echoes of forgotten trails, and the legends that refuse to die. Subscribe now and join us every day as we uncover new adventures where justice rides on horseback and every horizon holds another story waiting to be told.